Welcome to the Modern Husbands Podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money and the home as a team. I'm Brian Page, founder of Modern Husbands. Sometimes our listeners want more support than a podcast can give. Individual or couple support, which I now provide. Details can be found at modernhusbands.com, or you can email me at brian@modernhusbands.com. For today's podcast, we welcome Dr. Emily Oster. Dr. Oster is a renowned economist and author, known for her data-driven approach to pregnancy and parenting. She is a New York Times best-selling author, a professor of economics at Brown University, and the founder and CEO of Parent Data, a website providing research-backed information on pregnancy and parenting. In this conversation, Dr. Oster discusses the application of business principles to family decision-making, particularly for dual-career couples. Enjoy the show. Dr. Emily Oster, so excited that you're here to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here with you all.
So first of all, props. I was going to brag about this incredible game of pickleball that I won on Monday. And I just learned that you on Monday ran the Boston Marathon.
I did. And as I told my husband, I'm not dead. And so that feels like I finished and I'm not dead. And so it feels like a win.
I have no bearings of what time is good or not. I just know that for me, for where I live, like 25 miles?
It's 26.2 miles. And I will tell you my time, because if you are a person who runs marathons, all you want to do is talk about your time. And so I ran a 3:14:53, which was my goal is to be under 3:15. And so I don't know how meaningful that is. You have to do the division to figure it out, but I will just, now my marathon PR is out there in the world.
Here's how impressive that is. It's taken longer for my wife to drive 26.2 miles home and living in Atlanta, longer in a car than you just ran it. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, from obviously you heard Dr. Oster's background in the intake and realized that we have a rock star on our podcast today. So we want to dive into it and take full advantage of the time we have, so our listeners can walk away from this as better partners and better caregivers. So to begin, well, I know you said to call you Emily. Emily. In one of your books, The Family Firm, you advocate for applying business principles to family decisions. How can dual career couples implement structured decision-making processes to manage parenting responsibilities effectively?
I think in some ways, the tools I talk about in that book are most applicable when we have dual career couples where we're trying to do something which I think is very hard, which is to have two jobs and children and run what is effectively a sort of small to medium-sized enterprise, which is our household. My position here is that many of the tools we use at our jobs, we are using there because they help us work productively with other people, to divide tasks, to do things efficiently, to understand who is going to do what, and to have clear expectations about what's going to happen and when it's going to happen and who's going to own it and have responsibility. And those are all things which are very valuable for household tasks also. So to know, like, I am going to own the task of meal prep, and that's going to mean all of the subtasks, planning what we're going to eat, figuring out how we're going to acquire the food to eat it, making the food, dealing with serving the food, whatever it is, that, like, knowing that I'm responsible for that and that you're responsible for something else lets us kind of divide those things and, again, sort of have that set of expectations. And where I think we can talk more about this, but like where I think many couples sort of run into conflict is when I have a set of expectations that is different from what my partner has a set of expectations in terms of who's going to do what. And when I think you're going to do something and then you don't do it, I get understandably upset think many of those misunderstandings are because the other person did not know that they were expected to do the thing. And so, there's really this kind of like making, like, almost generating common knowledge that we would always do at work that we don't always do at home. And one of the things people get uncomfortable with here is this idea of like, well, I don't love my colleagues, like I don't like, we should just be able to make it work at home because like we love each other, and isn't that the way you make things work? And I think the reality is like you can love someone and still like want them to follow up on the conversation with an email that sets out the context of the conversation, and like those things can exist together. And in fact, when you are angry with someone because they didn't do what you thought they were going to do, and they're angry because they didn't know the expectation that you had, and you have a disagreement, that's not a place where then you're like, okay, let's have a romantic interaction. That is just a place where everybody's mad. And so somehow like these things can make your marriage better, not more transactional.
Thank you so much for that explanation, Emily. I do want to say I do love both of my colleagues, Brian and Christian, though, for the record, and this. But what strategies do you recommend then for couples to divide child care tasks equitably? So that we're both really ensuring we feel supported and engaged in that parenting process.
Yeah, so I think there's actually two phases of this that are important. So I think there's a first phase where we kind of think about what are the tasks and how we're going to divide them to begin with. And that's a kind of set of decisions that need to be made, not every week, but not just once. So, every 6 months, every year, depending on how old your kids are, there's going to be some change in what's expected. And that's a point at which I think people could sit down and say, here are the things we need to cover in the household. Here's who's going to do what. Here's how we're going to divide it. And a really important part of that conversation, which I think comes up a lot when we talk about invisible labor, is the idea that, if you're responsible for a task, that's really the whole task. It's not, cooking dinner is like being responsible for dinner is not the same as like boiling pasta and putting it in a container. That is a portion of being responsible for dinner. But being responsible for dinner is, thinking about making the pasta, making sure the pasta's in the house, making the pasta. Those are the whole thing. People call that different things, total responsibility transfer, or there's different forms of that word. So I think there's that first piece, which is just deciding what are the things that have to happen and then allocating them. And then there is an important follow-up piece, which is just stuff comes up over time, and having a clear way that we're going to communicate about how is this going, what unexpected things have come up, how are we going to manage those. I think that weekly family meetings are kind of a very common approach that I think can work for a lot of couples, to just sort of sit down and say, okay, like, let's just check in about like, how is this week going? Is there stuff coming up? In our house, we don't use meetings, we use emails. We send sort of our household has two like core emails. I'm in charge of one, my husband's in charge of the other. There's a week email, which I send at the beginning of the week to my children and our nanny and my husband, that says, here's kind of what's happening every day. And people are expected to write back and say if they disagree or if I've made a mistake or whatever. And then there's a weekend email, which he sends, which is, here's what's happening on the weekend, with the same set of expectations. And so I think for us, that's really, really useful. And it's something we've come up with over time because it sets those expectations so clearly. And then we kind of all know sort of what to expect. So some version of sort of putting together the parts of that work for your family. Again, just so much of this is about setting expectations and surfacing conflict early and not in the moment. Like deciding on Sunday who's going to leave work early to pick up the kid because school only goes until 1 p.m. for God knows what reason this week. Like deciding that on Sunday, even if it means arguing about it on Sunday is so much better than arguing about it at 12:45 when like you forgot and everyone is actually in a meeting right now and everyone thinks their meeting is so important.
I almost jumped out of my chair with excitement when you said that you do this through email, because I thought we were the only ones. We used to meet weekly to talk about money and household management, but because I'm doing most of the heavy lifting, that we still do it. Okay, it's not weekly; it's more bi-weekly. We've been married for 23 years, so we're in a groove. We do it through email because we're always coming and going. We're tired at different times. Kids are everywhere, and when you put it in an email and you keep that email, you're not forgetting anything. You can do it at a time where you're not stressed out. And I love the fact that your husband has the weekends and you have the weekdays, the delineation of those two. I'm going to steal that. I love that. Listeners, please, if you're a busy dual career couple and you're coming and going at different times, I'm telling you, the strategy works. And the fact that a world expert uses the same strategy makes me feel so much better. So thank you, Dr. Oster.
I love to validate people's choices.
Yeah, I got to ask too. So you do the emails. Do you also have like a linked like family like calendar?
Yes.
Well?
Yeah. All of the family calendars are shared. The kids have calendars. We have calendars. The babysitter has a calendar. We can see all of those things. So there's a lot of infrastructure like that. But the emails are just, a helpful. The emails help us navigate like how is dinner going to be. Dinner is not in the calendar. I mean, the existence of dinner is, but not what we're having. And so, among other things, that's like surfaced in the emails.
Right. This is not like, you're writing paragraph on paragraph. This is bullet points.
Yeah, it's bullet points. It says Monday. And if there's because the thing is, at this point, you're in like a routine. I have the shared calendar. Everyone can see school is on Monday. So it's like a way to say, often they're like Monday, everything's normal. Dinner is pasta. Here's who's responsible for putting the water on. Tuesday, everything is normal. Mostly it's like that. Sometimes there'll be sort of something to work out. But yeah, this is short. These are like very short emails. This morning's was like 6 bullet points from my husband about the weekend.
Okay, can we change lanes and talk about parental leave? It's a big topic, but when both parents have demanding careers, like dual career couples who are listening to this podcast, how can you approach kind of who takes parental leave and when, so that you're maximizing, the time off to spend with your child, but also balancing your career needs?
That is a very hard question. And so let's start with the sort of basic thing that not everyone has access to parental leave, but assuming that we're sort of in a dual career space where everyone has some amount of parental leave. I think one way to ask about this is like, what would be the sort of optimal way to take that? And we know a little bit about that from the data. And I guess here is kind of how I would put it together. Like, generally, mom's going to take, the birthing parent is going to take the beginning of the leave because there is a fair amount of recovery from childbirth, and that is just like a necessary piece of that. And we look at sort of what are the impacts on career, what are the impacts on baby. Something like 4 months of leave seems to be an amount that works for many people. And when we have extensions past 4 months, that for some people that's great. But when you look at like the outcomes for the baby, the 4 months seems to be like the most important. That's where we have the most evidence. There's a little bit of evidence about overlap, actually, particularly at the beginning. So there's actually some data from Sweden that shows better outcomes for mom and baby if dad can take some time at the beginning and actually can take some time flexibly. There seems to be a case in which like sometimes you've had a baby like for 6 days in you have mastitis. That's actually a really helpful time to have somebody home to help. So Sweden has this system called daddy days where you can take in addition to a bunch of other paid leave, you can take flexible time that overlaps with your partner early on. And extrapolating from that, it kind of suggests if you had an option to have both parents home for 2 or 3 weeks at the beginning, that might be a good use of some of the parental leave or some of paternal leave. My view is that if you can then take the rest of the paternal leave in a non-overlapping way, for many couples, that is very helpful in getting to a place where there is more equality in ownership of the baby. So there's something very specific about being alone with your kid for extended periods without the other partner that allows you to develop a set of routines, a set of expectations, a confidence in being able to be with the baby or kid alone that many men unfortunately don't get the opportunity to develop. And I think that can then be sort of somewhat detrimental to some of these task splitting things that we talk about. If I feel like I know how to do this and I've been home with the baby for 4 months and I'm the only one who can do this stuff, it's very easy for that to build on itself. And if dad feels he is not confident, he is not comfortable being alone, and he's just going to pass the baby off when it starts to cry, then mom decides, well, of course, I don't want to give it to him because then he's just going to pass it. And we kind of get into a bad cycle. And having just a period in which the other partner is in charge of the baby all the time for all of the day, I think that's actually pretty valuable for sort of long-term equality.
Two quick follow-up questions. You mentioned that 4 months after the baby's born is the total amount of time that you found is kind of the sweet spot for a parent. Is it the birthing parent for 4 months, or is it a combination of both parents for 4 months?
The data really focuses on the birthing parent. All of our data is about maternal leave. So I think, 4 months for mom. And then if there's more time that you tack on with dad, that is great.
Okay. And then the second question was that it sounded to me like what you were referring to when you were explaining why it's important for the other partner to spend quality alone time with the child is that it reduces the amount or reduces the possibility of maternal gatekeeping. Is that the case?
That is what I meant. Yes.
Yep.
And
Okay.
I think maternal gatekeeping is a very good term. It's a good term for that. Yes.
Okay.
Emily, how do you suggest couples incorporate some of the regular check-ins to discuss the relationship as well as parenting roles? And I guess, what are the benefits of those check-ins?
Yeah. So one of the most evidence-based sort of approaches to improving relationship quality is what we call a marital check-in, which is some form of either just with the couple or facilitated by a therapist way to sit down and say, how are things going? What am I happy with? What am I not? What is not going well? What could we do better? Those are, I think it's worth saying, that's a really hard conversation because, usually it's not, or not usually, but sometimes when we're having that kind of check-in, it's not like everything's going great and I have no concerns. Sometimes we're going to surface things that we're not agreeing with. And as humans, we do not like to purposely have conflict. And so I think one thing to note is that if you are not agreeing about, what you're doing, if you're not agreeing with your partner, you are having conflict all the time. So you're always having the conflict. You could surface it on purpose in a sort of lower stress moment in which you are hopefully ready to talk about it, or you can surface it in a hot moment when you're angry. And it is better to surface it in a cold moment, even though that is very hard to do. So I think there's kind of this recognizing the importance of these check-ins and then figuring out, is this something we can do alone? Is this something that we can, that we want some help with? There's another piece of this, which is you married this person or got involved with this person, had children with this person, because you liked them as a person. And that was one of the things that brought you together, was that you liked the other person. And that can be a very difficult thing to remember when all you are doing is dealing with logistics all the time. And so, if you talk to Tom Phelan about this, who's written some stuff about this, who I like very much, at some point I was interviewing him, and he told me, he said, what's the most important relationship in the household? And I was like, mom and the first kid, mom and the second. He was like, no, it's the parents. That is the foundational relationship of this family. And so thinking about, marital check-ins, great. A date is also good. It's good to have, and whether the date is, an hour at night that we reserve after the kids are in bed, or whether it's every other week we go out, and even if it's like, well, we can't have a babysitter. Okay, that's what iPads are for. Like, I would never judge a couple sitting at a table with their 7-year-old watching an iPad so they can like have a glass of wine. And like, that's an investment in your marriage. That's an investment in your kid. Like, that is really, really valuable. And so I think just trying to remember why you like this person in the first place, and not thinking, as some people will tell me, well, I'll remember that I like them later when my kid goes to college, because, then it's been 20 years since you remember that you like them, and like, maybe you don't like them as much anymore. You have to keep liking them the whole time. That's very important.
Listeners have told us that they love the ideas we share on our podcast to manage money in the home as a team, but want more help than one episode can provide. That's why I'm excited to announce On the Same Page Consulting for corporations, couples, and individuals. Visit modernhusbands.com and click Our Services at the top of the page to learn more about how I can help you or your employees manage money in the home as a team. Again, that's modernhusbands.com. Now back to the show.
Emily, what advice would you give to couples that want to start incorporating these check-ins? Because if they haven't been doing it, because they have been just caught up in parenting roles and life and all of the stressors that come with that, how can they start that incorporation?
Put a meeting on the calendar. I mean, I think like, I don't think it's not magic. Put a meeting. Say like, we're going to have a meeting and we're going to talk about and if it feels too big to say, let's talk about everything we're doing, let's put a meeting and talk about next week, and talk about like planning next week. Like, is there anything, or, and I think people like concrete. Like, it's much easier to bite size these kind of things rather than be like, I'm kind of unhappy with how stuff is going, I can't really do it. So one of the exercises I'll sometimes talk to people about is like, think about what's the one thing that bothers you every day, and like, what's the like one thing where just like every week or every 2 weeks you're like, this is really bothering me, and see if you can work with your partner to fix that. And so people will tell me things like, like we were fighting every week about who was going to do pickup, and we fix that by like talking about it on Sundays. Or we're, fighting every week about, like a disagreement about sunscreen. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that like gets into your head. And if you sort of say, well, actually every day we're arguing about this, let's just like decide it out once and then try to fix it. If you see a little success there, it can then say, oh, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? I think we, as humans, we need successes. We need wins. That's a way to get some quick wins.
I feel like the two areas of life that have the most conflicting information are artificial intelligence and parenting advice. Like, artificial intelligence is either going to like revolutionize the world or destroy it.
Could be either.
Teaching your child how to fall asleep on their own is either, the best thing you can do for your child, or you're torturing them. Like, there's these crossed messages. How do you advise couples on how to cut through all of that to just get to what works for them and not get overwhelmed?
I think the thing in your phrasing that's really important is just works for them. So I think a feature of parenting is that there are many good paths. And although it does not seem like that from the internet, which would tell you that there are only different ways to be terrible at this, actually, most of, there are some really basic things every kid needs: safe place to live, enough to eat, someone who loves them, like maybe a few books. Like, there are some core elements, but most of the choices we make, whether to sleep train or not, whether to circumcise or not, breast milk, formula, like all these kind of, what kind of preschool they go to, most of these things, like, they're really not very important in terms of long-term outcomes, and which means there are many good choices. And so recognizing you're going to make a good choice for you, and that's going to involve, thinking about what works with the values of your family, and then being able to say, okay, we've made the choice that's best for us, and then like, and that may not be the right choice for everybody because it incorporates maybe some evidence, but also a lot of things about our values and what's important to us. And if you think about your choices like that, it's much easier sometimes to sort of turn off the parenting noise, and then you can focus on the AI noise, which is unresolvable.
I'm going to add a question. So, have you seen Meet the Fockers? Oh, okay. So it is a great movie. I can assure you, you would love it. It's got Robin De Niro and Ben Stiller in it, and they have children, and they have a debate about whether they use the Verbe method or Verber method or the Fokker method. So, for you, what worked for you? For the baby to cry themselves to sleep, or for you to hold them until they fall asleep?
We use the cry yourself to sleep method, and it worked for us. And my kids sleep great, and they still like me, and so that was the right choice. That was the right choice for us.
Yeah, I wonder what Robin De Niro did with his kids, Brian.
Oh, did I say? What did I say? Did I say Robin? I meant Robert De Niro. Did I say? I just got so excited thinking about that scene. Crap, I got to cut that out. Oh my
that's
God.
I was cracking up.
Emily, you're bringing so much excitement out in me. You've got to watch the movie Meet the Fockers. I promise you'll love it.
Speaking of all this kind of wrong information that's about parenting or differences in parenting, let's talk about some of those parenting myths. So in your research, you've challenged several conventional parenting beliefs. Can you share some of the myths that dual career couples should be aware of and how debunking them can ease parenting stress?
I mean, I think one that really comes up all the time when you're talking about couples where everyone's working is the idea that daycare is bad for your kids. I would say, probably once a week, I am fed on Instagram a reel about how daycare ruins your children, and then I am immediately fed 4,000 DMs about how people also saw that, and is that true? And it is not true. There is a lot of evidence about daycare, and it's very clear, like high quality daycare, which means, people who are paying attention to your kids and not hitting them and meeting their basic needs, does not meaningfully impact outcomes. There are many good childcare solutions, nannies, daycares, extended family. There's many different ways to do this, but this messaging that parents get that, when you, like, as it is sometimes stated, when you drop your child at daycare, they think you died, which is a quote that I have heard frequently. And that's not true. That doesn't really make any sense. Your baby doesn't know what that means. They have no concept of mortality. And so it's not a sensible statement on the outset, but also there's just absolutely no evidence that this is bad for kids. And I think that's really important, because if you're going to go outside the home and work at your job all day and try to kill it and try to achieve things, it is very hard to do that if you are thinking that you are doing a terrible thing to your child all the time. And I think we just need people to understand, like, this is a totally great way to run your household and run your kids. And that's trying to achieve things as a parent is also important, because your own parents are people too, is maybe another way to say this that is worth remembering.
I'm wondering a little bit about kind of extending out decision making and communication about further off goals and sort of deeper held values, the value of education, what kind of extracurriculars our kids are going to do. How do you discuss those longer term or deeper held values, aside from, having money dates and setting up meetings on the calendar like you would, with your boss at work?
So I think there's different ways into this for different people. I think one thing that can sometimes be helpful for people is to sort of take a time to sit down and think about, what are our core values? If we had to sort of state our 3 core values or 3 core goals for our family, like what are they? What are, like, our key principles? And for some people, I think that could be a really useful way to try to get on the same page with their partner about kind of what are we trying to do here. I think another, like, much more practical way to do this is to sort of sit down and think, not in the specifics of next week, but like in the sort of general shape of my life. Like, what is important to me to have happen every day or every weekend? Things like, is it important to us to have family dinner? every night? Like, is that something that for some families that's super important? For some families, like that's not something that they want to do. And there can be many good choices here. But if you want to sit down as a family for dinner at 6 o'clock every night, like that requires a fair amount of structure. And knowing that we both care about that, or we've decided that's important, is something that we want to establish. I think similarly, I would say, thinking together about like, what do we want the weekend to look like? Do we want our weekends to involve a lot of sports? Or a lot of extracurriculars? Do we want to make sure there's a day on the weekend that we do family things? Do we want to prioritize an amount of family time on the weekend? Like, do the parents want to split the weekend? Like, what's going to make me excited when I wake up Saturday morning and I think about what I have to do? And if we can, that's a very concrete way to try to structure some of these big questions. Because if you said, I never want to wake up on Saturday, I want to wake up every Saturday and be like, the world is my oyster. We can go hiking in the woods and take our camper out and whatever. Then like, you better not sign up for travel soccer, because you are going to be sorry if you do that. And I think that's actually recognizing that is for many people a way to sort of structure many of these other decisions about how you run your family, but do it in a very practical, like meaningful way, which can be more accessible than saying, do I care about sports achievement, which is actually in some ways a much harder question to grapple onto.
So take notes, Christian, for that long-term parenting goals of, do you want to sleep in or not for you on those weekend days? Kind of switching gears just a little bit here. I mean, obviously same topic area with parenting, but I know it's something that Brian and I have actually talked at conferences about, and we've written about, but looking at gender roles in parenting, and especially traditional gender roles. So how do you suggest couples proactively address and find the balance with some of those societal messages or those traditional gender roles in parenting to make sure that there's really an equitable partnership still?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think this starts with work. When we talk about in many cases, somebody's going to step back a little bit from work or change something about how they're working when they have kids. Not always, but sometimes. And, when we talk about that, we're usually structuring it as like, well, are you going to be a stay-at-home mom? And that's like, no one sort of structures that as like, well, you're going to be a stay-at-home dad, even though like maybe that would be the right way to structure it. So I think taking the gender out of that whole conversation and asking, the way I put it in my book is, what is the optimal configuration of adult work hours for the household, which is much longer, but lets you think about kind of like, maybe we both step back a little bit. Maybe people step back at different times. Like, how do we structure this in a way that it doesn't imply either one person is the only person stepping out, and in particular, it isn't, necessarily mom. I think the other piece of this is, I just want to recognize actually quite hard to like generate a fully equal set of gender roles, and that maybe kind of pushing towards like absolute equality is sometimes at the expense of kind of pushing to efficiency. And so thinking about not like it must be we change exactly the same number of diapers, but thinking about how do we like make this into a structure that works for everybody, that feels like it is serving everyone, and where people do not feel, neither partner feels like they are being taken advantage of, but like neither partner feels like they are not able to kind of achieve what they want or do the things they want or be who they were hoping to be as a parent or as a career person or whatever it is. I think that seems much more important to me than like being wedded to some kind of sense of equality. I will say also on that you got to push very hard on external structures, because there's a bunch of research about this, but like, schools call moms. Like no matter who you tell them to call, the first person they call is mom. And in fact, like people have shown that this is true, even if they've done experiments where they like tell the school, like I don't have a lot of, mom doesn't have a lot of time, but dad's really available. And like, they still call the mom. And so there's a sort of sense in which we gotta train the world to meet this a little bit more.
I was literally just having that conversation with another mom even though the father is the one listed as the primary contact with the school because the mom is so busy at work, and they continue to still always just call the mom.
Just a quick hack for if you are like in my family now, it hasn't always been this way, but for my family now, I'm the primary point of contact for anything like school related or healthcare related. So when I put down my wife's information, I just put my phone number too. I don't give them access to my wife. I don't want her running a big meeting and the school calling like, hey, your kid has a, sniffling nose. I just don't give them the information.
That is, I have to say, I've literally never thought of that. That is really, really smart. That's really smart.
Thank you.
So smart, Brian.
Yeah, I tend to think of like old school, economics, like trade policy around specialization of labor. Like maybe Chelsea and I change roughly the same number of diapers because we're roughly, the same proficiency at changing diapers. But like remembering appointments, I'm so bad at, but Chelsea is like a rock star at. So when it comes to scheduling and remembering and putting appointments on the calendar, like that's just something that she typically handles. And when it comes to, meal planning and that kind of thing, I'll step up on those kind of things. So specializing, and then pushing overall towards, a more equitable approach without letting perfect be the enemy of good. Because we are literally never going to be perfect at this. And we got a lot of voices telling us it's stupid for us to be good at this as men. A lot of really cynical voices saying, if your wife's not a trad wife, a traditional, feminine ideal woman, like, then you're doing something wrong. And that's BS. And we always have to be pushing against that too as men.
Yeah.
I was so excited. I was going to follow up by saying that there's also learning by doing. And so when you sort of one of the advantages of specialization is that actually people can improve at the things, you want to sort of take advantage of existing differences. But for example, before we had kids, I did the sort of meal planning piece and I did the cleanup. My husband did a bunch of other stuff, but anyway, I was in front. And then once we had kids, we split it, and he started doing the cleanup, and I do the cooking, and that works very well because I'm very good at cooking, and he is terrible at cooking. But over time, I've gotten better at cooking, and he's gotten worse at cooking. He can't do anything, but I have gotten far worse at cleanup. And like, when I load the dishwasher, it's like I am not. He like unloads it and reloads it. Basically, he's just like he's like, I can't. And then he'll be like, did you see how? And I'm like, I didn't. This isn't important to me. I don't care. And I'm not going to try. And he's just like, he can't even, he's just like, step away.
That's me.
Somebody told me that in every relationship, there's one person who loads the dishwasher like a Swiss engineer and one person who loads it like a raccoon on meth. And, I'm the second one.
Yes. And then you still have all the gunk and food in the dish. And you like, how is it possibly going to be cleaned? And stuff's just randomly placed. And then when the dishes are done, like half of them aren't there because they're like underneath the dishwasher because they didn't even place it in the correct spot. I feel you.
Listen, I'm team meth raccoon on the dishwasher thing. You can be a Swiss surgeon or watchmaker all you
Basically,
want.
fine.
Yeah, it's fine. It gets clean. What's the point of the pod that you throw in there if it's not gonna, you know what I mean? Meth raccoons all the way.
I will say both me and my partner are very efficient, but we're efficient in different ways. So we still kind of argue about it because we have different ways to be efficient and I guess play the Tetris game.
If we want to do a spin-off podcast at some point, meth raccoons and the Swiss watchmakers, got something.
Many working parents experience guilt related to balancing career and family. What insights do you offer to help couples navigate and mitigate these feelings?
I mean, I think, a lot of this guilt comes from sort of the like comparison is the thief of joy. And I think people sort of feeling like somehow, perhaps some of this more comes from social media these days, but sort of the feeling of like every time I interact with my kids, an opportunity to mess up, and everyone else is doing it differently and they're doing it better. And I'm, being told that I'm not doing things right. And I really do think like a lot of avoiding parenting guilt is being confident in the choices that you make, and to know that, not that you have made the right choice, because we can never know that we made the right choice. And one day our children will be 35 and they'll be like, remember that time you didn't give me a birthday party and you gave my brother a birthday party, and like, that's why I hate you. I mean, who knows what's going to happen when our kids are big, but I think we can be, if we make choices in a thoughtful way, we can be confident, at least in the methods of our choice. And I think that is one, pretty clear antidote to this, kind of comparison oriented guilt. I will say also the other thing is like my mom worked, my parents both worked, and my mom she was not a guilty person. She was not a person who felt like she should be home with us or she should be like doing more. She was just like, this is like my job is important and I'm important and that's important to me. And I think that was like the greatest gift among many other gifts. That was such a great gift to me, because I sort of saw like, this is a person who is a great mom. She never felt guilty about it. And it is much easier than for me to not feel that guilt. And I feel like I'm giving that to my kids, that they can see, yeah, you can be like a really engaged parent and really super into your parenting and super into your kids and also super into your job. And that is, you can hold both of those things at the same time.
Hallelujah. Okay. I want to end with helping our listeners learn where they can learn more about you. All of your work, your books, where can they go?
Yeah, so the best place is parentdata.org, which is the web platform that I have, where you can find all the stuff that I work on. I have 4 books: Expecting Better, Crib Sheet, The Family Firm, and The Unexpected. I think for this audience, The Family Firm might be the kind of best way into that. And if you are into Instagram, I'm Prof. Emily Oster on Instagram.
Last question. What is one piece of simple and actionable advice you want to leave our listeners with today to be better spouses, partners, or caregivers?
Email is your friend.
Oh,
Love it.
This might have been my favorite podcast episode ever.
Thank you all. This was so fun.
Thank you. This was great.
Don't leave just yet. Be sure to like and subscribe before you do. And a reminder to visit modernhusbands.com if you're looking for money and home management support in your life. Just click the Our Services button at the top of the page. Again, that's at modernhusbands.com. And many thanks to our co-hosts, our guests, and of course, all of you for joining today.